been browsing, treading water that they drowning. My head on a swivel, yeah. It's only really my surroundings.
Hello and welcome to episode 200 of the Smash Accept podcast. I'm your host, Michael Royer. You can find me on Twitter at DynastyDadFF. That's 200, baby. Let's go. It has been such a wild ride over these last couple of years. Tonight's show is going to be kind of celebrating that, getting you guys ready for the playoffs. Before we go down memory lane and everything like that, John, this week, I mean, we talk about it all the time. Having that bye, and this is a stat that I saw from David Gautieri, it's just awesome, where if you had a bye, you are 18 to 20% more likely to win the championship. You only have an 11% chance if you got in that, in that week 15. And man, this first week, all of our guys that we love, the Derrick Henrys, the Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, DeAndre Hopkins, they just let us down.
Yeah, this was one of the wildest week 15s I can remember, and it's a really bad time to see some of these horrible performances come in, and a lot of the injuries that also rolled in that were really tough to manage. So having those buys, if you got them, man, they paid off huge this week. I honestly, like, even some of my where I'm one seeds, I would have potentially lost there to some of the other teams in the playoffs had I not had the bye. So yeah, it is worth so much to have those. Congrats to the teams that did get those buys. I just saw a lot of upsets across my leagues this week where a lot of the highest projected players just did nothing. So we feel you on there. But like we always say, getting into the playoffs is a lot of strategy. You got to know what you're doing. Winning in the playoffs, though, hey, you got to factor in the luck a little bit too.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of guys, since we started the Patreon, they're like, guys, you helped us get into the playoffs, and then you get Jared Goff, right? He puts up 45 against you, or Jake Browning or Baker Mayfield. And, among a lot of the listeners right now are like, what do I do now? And I think a lot of our listeners are new and they played a lot of redraft. And I'm like, get more into Dynasty, get yourself set up. As soon as it's over, we're getting ready for next year.
Yeah. And one of the lessons that we've learned this year, and every year it applies, but this year in particular with all the quarterback injuries, is that depth is key, right? Especially in Dynasty, because oftentimes it's unlike in redraft leagues where you can just pick up guys off the waivers. Usually waivers are fairly barren, right? And so to give a couple examples, I started Tommy DeVito in one of my Superflex leagues the week that he faced Washington a few weeks back. And that helped me get a win, and that helped me get the number 1 seed, right? And then always be monitoring those random bench guys, right? Somebody dropped Ty Chandler, yes, and I had Eli Mitchell on my bench as a McCaffrey guy. And then I put Eli Mitchell on IR for about, an hour before the game started. And I picked up Chandler. And at that time, Alexander Madison was healthy. But these are the random little moves to get depth that can make or break a title run, because everybody has injuries, right? It's not just your team that's unlucky, whether it's someone who missed Tyreek Hill last week, or someone who's going forward now potentially without Jamar Chase for the rest of the season. Yeah, those guys are going to matter.
Absolutely. And I love that, because so many guys, it felt like it was last minute. It's Tyreek Hill, it was Keenan Allen, all these guys were missing out there. And it just puts us in a spot, Snoog, where people are asking, how do we go about changing that for next year? How do we get ourselves into position? Mung brought it up great with depth. What other pieces of advice do you have for people that are entering the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, this week is not something to be scared of, especially if you're new to Dynasty. It's not likely where you see all these basically lower end teams, low seeds. I had like 3 6 seeds and 7th seeds that advanced this week that were very weak teams of mine that just dropped bombs, because I had guys like Jordan Addison, Laporta, just a bunch of rookies that balled out. So that doesn't happen often. That was the first time I've personally ever seen a crazy week like that where all the lower teams won. But like John said, it was an amazing week to have bye week teams. So if you clinch that bye, be prepared for things to kind of regulate next week. But stacking quarterbacks, I could count, I don't know how many teams I have, but it's basically every single one where I have like Joe Flacco, CJ Beathard's, Mitchell Trubisky's, all those type of like DeVito. Like I have like at least three starting quarterbacks on my bench at all times, just in case some people get injured, because it happens and it happens very fluently. Like I had Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert this year. I ended up flipping Herbert, but I moved Burrow as well. But like I had those backups that could play for a few weeks to get me wins and actually sneak into the playoffs. So depth is key. Always stash at least 3 tight ends on that bench as well, running backs and wideouts, depending on the format and kind of the lineup, like of how many people you start matters as well. But it's just all about preparing yourself for the playoffs. You got to make those trades before the playoffs start. You got to stay on top of things.
It's a tough pill to swallow. In my one league, I started Dak Prescott and Kyler Murray. He was starting Baker Mayfield and Devin Singletary, and those two guys torched my two guys. You know, you're just like, he didn't even have a second quarterback. Absolutely destroyed me. John, this is 200. You know, like this is something that, and Mung, like we created this thing over 2 years ago, you know, where it was just an idea at first. We're like, all right, you know what? John, you're always answering questions on Twitter. Mung, you're always answering questions on Twitter. I was, you know, and it was like, we just kept answering questions. We were in that same area. And then we formed this thing as a group, right? Like it wasn't even supposed to be a podcast. We did like 7 episodes of the Dynasty Dad podcast, you know, which was an interesting experiment. I remember that first one. It was like the 3 of us and I think Dynasty Humble, and we just got on there and vibed. And, you know, it's been such a crazy ride and experience to think we're at 200 episodes now. And I want to share some things with you guys, the listeners. Spotify Wrapped just came out, and some of these things, the guys in the Patreon know this, but Smash Accept now is listened to in over 31 different countries, which is crazy to think, you know, when we first got this thing started. We looked at this past year, a 269% growth from the podcast, you know, which is absolutely amazing that you guys keep wanting more of the content. Right now, this past year, 58% more minutes created. So we tried to, you know, we brought Snoog on. We tried to create a secondary podcast. We're recording twice a week, almost double the content right now. And these are cool. These are really cool. So, you know, if you're listening to podcasts, you probably listen to multiple, and especially if you're in Dynasty or fantasy football. Right now, we are in 1,196 people's top 10, 651 listeners top 5. And this one's interesting to me. 104 fans. We are your number 1 podcast. There were guys that shared with me. I listened to, you know, particular guys say, hey, I'm in the top 0.5%. I listened to 4,000 minutes of your podcast this year. I mean, like those things to me, John, just blow my mind. Like when we started this, it was, you know, your wife listened to it and my mom, and, you know, and maybe Mung sent some to family.
Thanks,
and that
baby.
was about it, man.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I still do for sure remember that very first episode that I got on with Mung and you, and I had my cowbell t-shirt on.
That's where it started, baby.
Introduced it. Yeah,
more
very
cowbell.
first time. I think that was like episode 4 or 5 for you, but it was just hit it off when we just were vibing. We knew this thing was going to work. But to look back and see where the pod is now, 200 episodes, not a lot of pods make it that far. Let's just start with that. But to see kind of the fan base that's been built up, the guys that don't mind hearing our dad jokes, and, you know, some good takes, some not so great takes, but we're just having fun, building community. A lot of moments that we could go back over the years. I mean, even just thinking about how we've grown as individuals, seeing you hit 15K this week. I remember like looking up to Scott Fish and Ryan McDowell, and then, you know, we're getting like Ryan McDowell on the pod with us.
Mm-hmm.
And
we were fanboys, man.
You remember
like,
I was trying to get into the Scott
all the
Fish
time.
Bowl.
I'm like, hey man, hey, did you see such and such is going to be on the show?
Yeah,
you know, and it was
for
like,
sure, fanboying. And, you know, now like I've been in Scott Fish Bowl a few times, and I feel like I'm a part of that kind of Dynasty analyst community. And I actually made the semifinals
that's awesome,
this year, which is for me, that was like a huge goal that could you ever make it to that against, you know, competing against all the other pros out there. So that was a cool thing. I mean, even just thinking about the Godfather episode there with Ryan McDowell.
He stopped following me after that one.
I can't refuse. Yeah, we've had a lot of fun over the years for sure.
Yeah, Mung. I mean, same thing. Like this has just been such a fun experience. You know, when we get on here, it's like second nature now. It's like it's so much fun. And then I know what you're gonna say. You know what I'm gonna say. We sharpen each other. You know, I think this has just been such a fun experience over the years.
Yeah, well, you guys have to remember that when we started this, it was during COVID, so there wasn't much to do. All right, this wasn't my first choice.
That's what,
Yeah,
I
right.
didn't necessarily want
Would
to
have
be on
preferred
this
to be doing other
podcast.
stuff. Yeah.
No, but it's been a great journey. It's been a ton of fun. The whole what is it? Iron sharpens iron, right?
There you
Where if you talk and discuss stuff, talk it out with smart people, then you become smarter. We all have hits and misses, right? I have Trey Lance on my record. Dad has Travis Fulgham. We all have those black marks on our report cards, but we learn from those and we continue to grow and learn to provide you guys with the best advice we can. And I think really we've had a lot of smart guests on, and we had a couple episodes. I think we experimented with a different host instead of Dynasty Dad over here, and
just
those
one. It was just
yeah,
one. And
those well, it felt like three, but
I got to give credit to John. John's brought me back into this twice. The one time we had a guest host, and he goes, "Don't ever do that again." By the end of the time the season was over, we had a guest host, and he's like, "No, just don't do it again." And then when my Twitter account got banned the first time,
Yeah.
and then John was like, "Don't do it," and started it back up, and now it's back up to 15K. So I got to thank you, John. And both you guys have kept me straight over the years. And Snoog, I mean, you're the young buck in here. We've been here for 200 episodes. You've been in for the last 36. It's been talk to me a little bit about your experience, because it's like your first guest appearance was just in a side pod that you and I did, and it's just been fun ever since.
Yeah, it's been great growing with you guys and watching each and every one of you guys grow. I've always loved the fantasy football podcast, Dynasty especially, and I always wanted to be a part of one. And Dad, I know you and I were talking a lot before we joined up just about growing and like kind of the ways to do it. And you kind of took me under your wing and helped me grow as well. So I can't thank you guys enough for that. It was amazing getting to meet John and Mong, just two more Dynasty smart guys that I can talk to. I know John's heavy into the rookies, and that's kind of how me and him started talking, was with the Kendrick Miller love last year and the CJ Stroud love. But yeah, I've had a great time getting to come on here and just shoot the shit about fantasy football with you guys and talk about our good, our bad takes, have receipts, kind of tease each other a little bit about the bad ones, and it's been overall super fun. So I've been super grateful for that from both of you guys.
All right, so we are entering week 16, and a lot of running backs, they left us high and dry, and I keep getting questions. I've been putting my rankings out every single day on Twitter and in the Patreon, and people are like, "Hey man, like who can I trust at running back this week?" Like every single one of them felt like, aside from Christian McCaffrey and Kyron Williams, left us down, and Rachaad White. I mean, Mung, who are those guys that you're trusting this week for that running back position? It's become, after what we saw last week, it's really changed my dynasty perspective. I have a new dynasty RB1 is Jahmyr Gibbs for me. I love Bijan, but I can't even see a scenario where if you were picking today that you would go the other way. It's just the position has changed so much. Who can we trust this week? And talk to me a little bit about your philosophy over this past year.
Yeah, and I know the listeners of this podcast are smart people in general, or at least they're smarter now that they've started listening to us. No, but seriously, I think there's a lot of smart people out there who play Dynasty, and I would just recommend that if you only play Dynasty or Redraft, to broaden your horizons a little bit and at least test the waters for DFS or daily fantasy. And the reason I say that is because, well, one, you don't need to put a lot of dollars into it. They have small contests where it's 10 cents per entry just to get your feet wet. And the reason I found DFS super helpful, even for Redraft and Dynasty, is one, you have those low salary guys where you really have to scrape the bottom of the barrel, right? Sometimes you only have enough salary for, let's say, a third string running back or a rookie running back who hasn't played much yet, but you think, hey, maybe he'll get his shot this week. And that's where you can kind of find and research deeper into the guys that many people have not heard of. And two, it helps you really see fantasy. And even though Dynasty is year-round, is more of a week-to-week game, right? We have to have short memories about, oh, this player burned us. And a lot of people are like, well, I'm sitting him this week, or I'm never going to draft him again. And that's not necessarily, well, sometimes there are players like that, right? But at other times you have to delve deeper into, well, why did this guy bust? Or why is this player still a good play this week, even though he put up a big fat 0 last week, right? And two guys that fit that profile for this coming week for me are Breece Hall and Bijan Robinson. And you just talked about how you've moved Gibbs past Bijan in your dynasty rankings. And the issue, we all know the issue with Bijan has nothing to do with it. It's Arthur Smith, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, we have to look into what happened in the last game, one with the weather and the fumble, right? That factored into Bijan getting phased out of that game. But coming home, playing in a game where they can keep it close and potentially even lead again, I'm going back to him. I'm going back to Breece Hall. And the Dolphins got they completely shut down the Jets, right? But we didn't foresee Zach Wilson getting concussed in that game. And as sad as it is to say, he's a big step up from Trevor Siemian, right? And that was part of the reason that Breece really failed. But you have to look at weekly matchups, whereas Breece is at home against Washington, possibly the worst defense in the entire league, right? You're not sitting Breece Hall just because he put up a stinker last week. And then, if I may, usually I leave the deep sleeper picks for, you mentioned that guy who's listened to 4,000 minutes of us this year. So for guys like him towards the end of the show, but I'll toss the regular listeners a bone. I'll leave this sleeper in the middle of the show this time. I like Roschon Johnson this week. We've seen his role grow. They started Dante Foreman last week, but he was terribly ineffective. So they moved away from him, gave Herbert and Roschon Johnson more touches. And this is, again, at home, the Bears against the Cardinals defense that has not looked good all year long. And we've seen Dante Foreman had a 3-touchdown game against the Raiders about a month or so ago. And these blow-up spots can potentially help you advance in the playoffs and also to potentially win a title.
I love it. John, right now, I mean, there's been, I just updated my dynasty rankings. I just updated my weekly rankings, and you got to trail. The big thing I've been doing all year is talking about trailing the targets, trailing the targets,
baby.
And Kyren Williams with 106 touches over the last 4 weeks. Chuba Hubbard second with 93. Rachaad White with 90. I mean, some of these guys, it's a matter of you got to follow it. You got to put yourself in there. I mean, it doesn't feel sexy to put Chuba Hubbard above Joe Mixon. No, but he's literally getting the rock nonstop. Guys like James Cook, who's second in the league in rushing now, is just absolutely exploding. 362 yards with 3 touchdowns over the last couple of weeks. Who are some guys that you're like, you know what? I got to get this guy in my lineup. It's a really tough week, John, when it comes to guys coming off injury. I mean, Aaron Jones came back last week, had a nice week. Jonathan Taylor looks like he's coming back. Isaiah Pacheco. I mean, it is. Yeah. After 7 guys, I'm really worried about what are we looking at for this week.
Yeah, this is where, I mean, some of the earlier points, having that running back depth is huge. And you do need to kind of really follow where the targets are going and some of the changes that are taking place on some of these teams. I mean, look at what's going on in Buffalo. James Cook is blowing up. Why? Well, Ken Dorsey is out. You got interim Joe Brady in there. And they've just started feeding the guy, and even Dallas, who's a vaunted defense, just couldn't stop it. They just kept pounding the rock. You mentioned like Devin Singletary, Rachaad White. These guys are getting a lot of touches, and you kind of have to ride that. We talk about riding the hot hand at running back. You need to do that in the fantasy playoffs. You mentioned Kyren Williams. The only guy I feel more comfortable with playing this week than Kyren Williams is probably Christian McCaffrey. Even against Baltimore, Christian McCaffrey is probably the number 1 overall play. It's probably the consistent view there. I will say, if you're throwing out hot takes, Mung got it started. One guy that I really like this week, top 10 play for me, Ty Chandler. Cheap guy you can go buy. I think I even made an offer to Mung over here to try to get Ty Chandler. Let's see if we can work something out there. But, man, he got a ton of touches there, too, in Minnesota, who, is rolling with their backup QB, along with half the league, it seems like, has a backup QB in there with Nick Mullins in this case. Those are some of the guys I like this week. I will say, too, I do think that Bijan could bounce back a little bit. I like that take, and I think he was definitely phased out, had a bad fumble but Indianapolis too. I think I'm seeing that they're like 30th against fantasy points allowed for running backs. I kind of like that take as well, Mom.
I like it. Kyron Williams is an interesting one. We just talked about Williams, James Cook, Rashad White. I've moved all three of them inside my dynasty top 12. And it's like, we talked about draft capital. We talked about a lot of things on there, but you got to move him up. Snoog, if there's one guy we want to see perform in week 16, who is it?
I'm gonna go with two guys just because I have like a low end guy and then like a high end guy. I'll start it off with the low end guy. I think Tyjae Spears is a guy that could do really well this week. He's averaging a 14% plus target share, which is phenomenal, especially as a rookie running back, pacing 50 plus receptions, and he's just super explosive, great in open space. And they're playing Seattle. I mean, Seattle just beat the Eagles. They're pushing playoffs heavy. I think they're going to absolutely smoke the Titans, and then they're going to be playing from behind. Will Levis is most likely out, so I think we're going to see a lot of Tyjae Spears on the field and a lot less Derrick Henry. Hopefully, because I'm not starting Derrick Henry after that 3-point game he just gave me in every league. So he's going to the bench. So hopefully, it is a Tyjae Spears week. But the guy that I'm going to go with, that high end guy, has to be an authentic old Snoog guy, Travis Etienne. He just hasn't been himself the past few weeks. The Jags haven't been able to run the ball. They haven't been able to do much other than throw the ball and kind of just gouge down the middle and across open field with Evan Ingram. So I'd like to see Travis Etienne get it going. He's had some tough matchups, but he's a phenomenal running back, RB3 right now, 230 plus fantasy points, averaging workhorse touches per game. He's been catching the ball a lot too. He's been averaging 3 to 4 receptions a game, which is good. I'd love to see Travis Etienne get the ball in space more, like we saw in that Clemson time, because every time he gets the ball, every time he gets the ball out of the backfield, it's a first down. So I don't know why they don't utilize him in that like Kamara role more, or just getting him out in the flat and just getting creative with him. We need to see more of that. We need to see more off tackle. But I think he gets in the end zone this week against Tampa Bay. And then in week 17, Carolina stinks. So
there we go.
I set you up for your boy Alvin Kamara. We are doing the Alvin Kamara autograph mini helmet giveaway here. So what we did was we took 3 random names from the Patreon that my kids picked, and then 3 of the most active guys in there. There's 6 guys. This is for an autographed Alvin Kamara mini helmet. Let's get it. Who's it gonna be? Who's it gonna be? Let's go.
I got to put Snoog's name in there. Wow.
Johnny Yonkers. There we go.
Johnny.
All right. Johnny. Congratulations, brother. You are getting the autograph. And that's been something that, we did that with the Garrett Wilson jersey. We did that with the Alvin Kamara. We're hoping to be able to do some more of those and give back to you guys. That's been a fun thing. Alvin Kamara has been so good this year. Snoog, I set you up, bro. The hell are you? We got the jersey behind you. No, for sure, man.
Top 5 play this week.
I talked too much about Jahmyr Gibbs and Kamara. I had to give ETN some spotlight.
No, okay. I love it. So real quick, I want to talk to each one of you guys about your favorite guests. I mean, Snoog, you've been on here the shortest, but we've had a couple of really big, John and Mung and I have had some old school, some OGs, some guys that are big into diving into film. You brought in a lot of guys that are a lot more new wave, some of those YouTube guys. I mean, who has been your favorite guest that we've had the pleasure of dealing with? And then we'll go over to Mung and then John.
Favorite. I'd say just as like in this space, respect for just absolute monster. I have to go with Joe Arico. I mean, he's been a guy that has paved the way for a lot of people, redraft monster, and he's starting to explore more in the dynasty. So I'm excited to keep growing with Joe, close friend of mine. It was fun to have him on the pod and just talk about running backs and kind of understand his process and how he goes about things. But guy's an absolute beast, wins tons of leagues every year. He's on Underdog. He's on everything. So make sure you follow Joe Arico on Twitter at NoExpertFF, because he's just an absolute monster. And Dad and I have grown a great relationship with him, and we're going to get him more exposed with the Smash team. John, Mung, we're going to try to get you guys on with Joe as well. Just keep everybody networking and keep growing those relationships. So
yeah, and it was cool. We had Flock Fantasy on. We had Ron Stewart, a lot of good YouTube guys. Definitely worth checking out. You know,
Those are goats right there.
that was a lot of fun because that's a different community than we've been involved with in the past. Mung, I mean, we have had great guests from guys that cover, you know, rookie drafts, guys that cover just dynasty. Talk to me about some of your favorite guests because, man, over the years, I mean, 200 episodes. I think in the off season we usually have on about 20, so we've had 30 to 50 guests on here so far.
Yeah, and I think everyone brings a different perspective, which is why we have guests, right? Because even though we think we're pretty smart, and hopefully you guys do as well, it's never bad. It's never a bad thing to get more perspectives, to get that discourse flowing. And you know, I got to shout out our guy over at Football Guys, Dave Kluge. Always fun to chop it up with him. And then a really unique perspective that I liked when we had him on. I think it's a couple of years ago now. Hopefully we'll be able to get him back this offseason. But Angelo. He talked a lot about kind of more the physical traits and just how different players have different potential based on what they can do in particular schemes because of how they can cut or where they're explosive. And just that's something that, you know, we crunch a lot of numbers, but that's a very different and unique look into how to evaluate some of these prospects that are coming out.
Yeah, and I mean, I've loved some of the relationships that we've had over the years. I mean, I jump on his podcast all the time. He's been on here. We kind of joke around like John, this is old school, but the Alec Baldwin of the SNL type school getting in there so much. Dynasty Zoltan, you know, it's always been great having him as like an alternative that jumps on here all the time. Matt Hicks comes on every single year. You know, like we've had some of the best guests jump on here. I mean, you mentioned McDowell. We've had, you know, Chris Harris, who's a guy that, you know, I remember growing up watching fantasy football and I was like, this dude is on here, you know, and then Dave, I mean, we've had so many great guests. Talk to me about some of your favorites.
Well, yeah, I have to throw a few memories out there because Mong rattled off some of my favorites as well. So I don't know if you remember this, Dad, with Angelo coming on. It was actually St. Patty's Day, and we both rolled in with green shirts. And I was trying to grow out a beard. It was a weird deal because it was like I was trying to be Dynasty Dad. And it just didn't work out so well with the beard. So I think it was Seamus O'Toole and Bobby O'Shea for that.
Let's do it.
That was a good one.
I love that one.
And then coming back to Dave Kluge, you know, getting Kluge is always fun. I think we had him on for the Smashies.
Yep, and that was
best Smashies ever.
Best Smashies ever. If you guys didn't ever hear the Smashies, we all had our award show. Came on there. And that was actually his first podcast, which is just such a cool thing. Crazy. He jumped on with us, and now he's been blowing up in the space, which is awesome. And
so there's some fun ones. I think if I had to throw my favorite, it's probably not going to surprise anyone, but it is Matt Waldman, and it's because I just admire his experience in analyzing rookies and film and Snoo, you know, like that's how we got going. That's what I've got as my background here. I've really gotten into that part of Dynasty. It's really helped sharpen my game. But I mean, I just listen to these guys and learn how they watch film, see what they look for, and what's actually not as important as well, and learn how to combine the film and the analytics and kind of figure out how you're going to profile these rookies. Matt Waldman to me is kind of like the best at that, and having him on the show for me, again, fanboy, having him on. And one thing I will throw in there too, he's always comparing running backs to Frank Gore. And I think everyone remembers this one, but on your 40th, Dad, you are now known as the Frank Gore fantasy, if I'm not mistaken.
That was my man. Dynasty Bro Dot said that. I thought you were going to
say Frank Gore fantasy.
I thought you were going to say your favorite guest all time was me because I wasn't in the host chair that night. You know what I mean? Like you took over the host chair.
That's right.
You did it twice. You did it with Waldman. You did it in that one. And, you know, you're going to steal my job. You absolutely love when you do that. You know, and I was hoping you'd say me. But Waldman is the first guy that, like, I was like, wow, like I need to start taking notes of what he's talking about, you know, and Angelo as well. Angelo talks about, you know,
Angelo's good.
The body mechanics of things. And it's just like, listen to those guys, maybe just sit back and just be in awe and really just kind of look at those things. We talked about Waldman. We've had him on every year. He's turned us on to guys like Anthony Richardson before it was big. You know, he's really talked a lot about Stroud. He's been someone that's just nailed the QB takes, you know, just absolutely been on fire with that. I got to talk to you guys about your favorite quarterback plays of the week. Like we got to pick those guys out. Everyone, I mean, Dak let us down last week, and Kyler's been up and down. And Snoog, I mean, I'm getting so many questions with CJ Stroud coming back. It's like, do I play this guy? Do I play that guy? Give me your top three guys that three guys that are sticking out for the quarterback position that you got to get in this week.
I think Dak's definitely one of them. I mean, I think he's gonna have a big bounce back, still like on the verge of that MVP conversation. And they're playing Miami. I mean, this is a team, not a great defense, but it's going to be a potential shootout against the Dolphins. And it's a must win because I know they're fighting with the Eagles for top of the division. So I'm excited for that. Jalen Hurts is another one. He's coming off a kind of off week, but I think they're going to absolutely smoke the Giants. And he was sick last night. So I'm looking forward to him dropping like 25 plus.
What's horrible is every time Jalen Hurts goes out there and playing, that's one of my favorite takes of all time was predicting his breakout, then predicting it going even further. It's like when he plays bad, if you look at it in points per game, he's always top 3. In the last 4 weeks, he's number 2. In the last 8 weeks, he's number 1. Like you look at those things and everybody's just like, okay, let's back off Jalen Hurts. He just gets it done. It's not exciting sometimes with the tush push, which miraculously I saw Zoltan posted 28% of his fantasy points have actually come off that play this year, which is mind-blowing, just mind-blowing.
That's awesome.
But, Mung, who are 2 guys that you would just say, you know what, I got to get these guys in my lineup. I'm on – a lot of our listeners are on the fence. This is the week. You're playing 2 quarterbacks. Who are they going to be?
Let's get gross. Number 1, the revival of Baker Mayfield against an awful Jaguars defense. This game is a potential shootout. Hopefully Trevor Lawrence is healthy for it. But either way, we've seen that Baker Mayfield has become a little bit more consistent over the past few weeks. He's avoiding some crazy sacks, scrambling around behind the line of scrimmage. And I think this is one where he could go off again, right? He impressed at Green Bay last week. And then how gross do you want to get? Because if Zach Wilson passes concussion protocol, we saw him dice up the Texans defense at home 2 weeks ago before he got concussed last week at Miami. And now he's at home against Washington that made Tommy DeVito look like Tom Brady. So as gross as it sounds, sometimes, especially this year with all the quarterback injuries, you have to dig deeper and really look at the matchups rather than just looking at the names and seeing how gross it might look.
I'm going to throw one out there, John. I hope this isn't taking yours, but I'm advocating for people to start Jake Browning right now. Jake Browning coming off QB4, QB8 over his last 3 weeks. And he has that swagger and that moxie where I'm like, dude, I have no problem if I'm in the fantasy playoffs trading for Jake Browning and starting as my QB2. Right this week, I think I have him as QB11, which seems crazy, right? Like you look at when your rankings are each week, but I'm buying him. I'm buying him. I'm throwing him out there. I have no problem at all. John, give us 1 or 2 more.
Yeah, just listening to all these names getting thrown out there, it does remind me of what has become one of my favorite go-to Smash Accept pods is the injury lawyers. All right.
Yes.
So we've had a lot of fun with that one. I hope you guys have enjoyed that one. But I mean, rattling off these names.
Nothing better than putting on the suits, coming out
suiting
here,
up,
letting them know we mean business.
Yeah, and even Mon got in on it this time around. But I mean, listen to some of these names. You might see Mason Rudolph, Trevor Siemian, Easton Stick, Tommy DeVito, Gardner Minshew, CJ Beathard, Jake Browning. I mean, I could keep going. Here's the thing. Some of these guys are playable. I actually like the Jake Browning take, but try not to get too cute here in the playoffs, okay, and overanalyze everything. You really want to try and stick with the studs if you can. Try and even trade, pick up guys that are going to be pretty reliable things. We just saw a lot of unpredictable things go down in week 15. Try not to overreact, though. I'm kind of with Snoog on this. I do think that Dak bounces back. I actually think Justin Fields will bounce back on Arizona.
It's the Cardinals?
The Cardinals, come on. Like, those guys would not surprise me at all if they put up top 5 numbers, right? I think that the Dak Tua thing hopefully does turn into a shootout, like you said, Snoog. I do kind of like both those guys. Look out for Jared Goff. He's played a ton better at home than on the road, and he is on the road against Minnesota.
But it's indoors.
They haven't played the Vikings yet either.
19 touchdowns indoors, just 7 outside. Yeah,
and I mean, even don't even count out Jordan Love. I mean, he's got Carolina this week. We'll have to see there. But I'm thinking all those guys are top 10 plays. But I mean, you know, if you can possibly do it, I mean, the top 3 guys we've always had in Dynasty are also my top 3 plays for the week: Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes. Ride those guys if you can. I think they're going to potentially help you advance to the ship next week if you've got them.
Yeah, I like it. Snoop.
What do you guys think about Matt Stafford this week? Do you think he continues his phenomenal stretch of games against the Saints defense on primetime?
Absolutely, and stack it up. I know it's a Thursday night game, and it's a tough Saints defense, but he's a definite top 10 play. I have a lot of people asking, and I think the biggest thing, Snoop, to flip it around on you is people are saying, you know, Purdy or Stafford this week. That's a question I'm getting everywhere: is Purdy or Stafford, or Purdy or Lamar? You know, because they both have that tough matchup there.
They play each other. Yeah, Purdy and Lamar playing each other.
I feel like what we've seen from Stafford the last 3 weeks, he's been top 3. What we've seen from Purdy is also in the top 3 over that time, you know, and I got to go
conversation.
And Mung, this is that time everybody's coming at me and they're saying, you know what, why you have Lamar in your top 5? It's because Lamar could drop 40 on you. And this is something that I keep saying to people when I give advice is, do you feel like, I had a guy ask me today, he's like, Jake Browning or Lamar Jackson? I said, well, here's my question for you. If you lose and you started Jake Browning, how are you going to feel about that? And if you lose and you start Lamar Jackson, how are you going to feel about that, right? Like starting the guy that makes the most sense. We all talk about those gut calls. And I know you get a ton of DMs. Like, how do you answer that question to them? Because for me, if I start a guy like Jake Browning over Lamar Jackson and Lamar Jackson drops a 40 burger, that's going to be months of not being able to, you know, focus in on what I need to do.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to why I recommend people kind of test the waters with DFS a little bit, right? Because that forces you to look away from the name value of players and really look at specific matchups, specific injuries that impact those matchups, right? You guys talked about Matthew Stafford, how he's come on in recent weeks. Well, what changed? Well, Cooper Kupp got healthy, right? That's massive. Kyron Williams came back healthy, right? Those were the top weapons. And we've always known that Matthew Stafford has the arm to hit those weapons. So again, when you look at guys like Jake Browning, right, you really do have to play the matchups, because when you look at who he's played, okay, he's played well, but he started in his first game against the Steelers, and he didn't do great. Then he destroyed, again, a bad Jaguars defense. And then he played well against the Colts and the Vikings, both of whom have issues in their secondary. So when you go see him going to Pittsburgh now on the road, outdoors, yeah, I think he has a fairly high floor, especially because he's run in a couple of touchdowns as well over the last few games. But I don't think there's any way you're starting Jake Browning over, for example, a guy like Lamar Jackson, right?
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
I got to ask you guys real quick, because it looks like, you know, a lot of my teams that are moving towards the championship have CJ Stroud, and CJ Stroud has yet to practice. There's a lot of news out there. I mean, what kind of Snoog and I did an entire podcast on this, trying to figure out what kind of trades we make. But John, I mean, we got to avoid the pitfall of like trading a young stud like that. But then on the flip side, it's like, you got to go all in, man, if you're in this area at this point. So what are some trades if CJ Stroud were out that you'd be willing to make?
Well, you know, first of all, like I don't hate Stroud this week. I actually think he will play. He's got a tough matchup with Cleveland, but it is at home. And Stroud has just overcome a lot of tough matchups all year long. The guy's just exceeded all expectations. So I have him as a low QB1. Kind of maybe high QB2, let's call it 11, 13 range, somewhere in there. So if you're okay with that, in many cases, you know, you're contending, Stroud's probably your QB2, possibly, right? Maybe you picked him up. So be very careful in trades. Now, if you had Stroud on your roster, you're trading him to a contender. One thing that I still have been advocating a lot is picking up Anthony Richardson. And he's been out of sight, out of mind. Remember, Matt Waldman was one of the guys that came on the pod and was talking to us about Anthony Richardson and all that he could do, and kind of helped sell me on him. That's an interesting move right there, right? Where, you know, you might pick up a plus on top of Anthony Richardson at this point for Stroud. I kind of like that one.
Yeah, and
I
that's
think, yeah,
that Richardson take I love because
Mhm.
we want to talk about once you're in the playoffs, that's fine. If you just got bounced, and you don't have that trade deadline, now's the time to make a move to try to get one of those guys. Look
sure.
on Snoog and I talk about this every week of what I did this week. I mean, I'm in 18 leagues. The ones that lost, I went, all right, who lost? Who do they have on their team that, or who won, moved on, that they might have an Anthony Richardson. They might have in Smash Except One guy traded Tank Dell for Stephon Diggs. If you're not contending, that is an absolute smash because Diggs is starting to be on the decline. And,
I
a
like
guy
that
like
one.
Tank Dell is ascending, and you have so many opportunities here where you can just get yourself into a better position for 2024.
Yeah, I might throw one more out there. I actually kind of like the idea of moving for Justin Fields plus. Everyone's down on Fields. He just had a rough game, and kind of it feels like the jury's out, and Chicago is going to draft a new QB. So all of a sudden, Fields is very attainable. I have him as I'll say a top 6 type play for Week 16, and for sure this guy's going to land a role next year, possibly an improved situation versus Chicago, right? Like there's a lot of QB needy teams out there. We just established that. What if Justin Fields lands in one of those situations next year? Like stock up, rocket ship, right? So I don't mind trading in this case CJ Stroud is who you were talking about for Fields plus, and might improve your playoff situations and get yourself a nice asset kind of buy low opportunity, right? Now it does come down to the plus, but that's another one I'll throw out there for consideration.
All right. So when we were talking about this, we were talking about some of our favorite moments, and something that we've always done on the show, Mung, is just adapting to market value, adapting to try to help people with their trades. That's how this whole thing started. And I think we got to establish some of the players that you're interested in buying going into 2024. A lot of guys right now, that's 90% of the talk right now in the Patreon is like, hey, who can I get for 2024? Who's an ascending asset? Who's a guy that I need to buy now before they take off? Because we've hit that in the past. We've hit guys before they blow up. We've hit guys that it's like, hey, buy him now.
Absolutely.
And in that cyclical nature, it's like now we're buying him, and then they're going to keep going into an area where we can sell them if we want to 6 months from now for more than what we paid.
Yeah, one guy that Snoog actually mentioned earlier, I like Tyjae Spears, right?
Yes.
We're expecting Derrick Henry to move on, and he's shown a lot of burst in flashes. I will say because of the injury history, I don't know that I'd invest a ton into him. But at the same time, you kind of want to get ahead of the curve where even if you're not necessarily sold on him, we've seen guys like this where come free agency, when teams move on from older vets, these guys get at least a temporary bump where if you pay 2 seconds for Spears today, maybe you flip him for a first and a third or a first and a second, even depending on the hype come March or April, right? Another guy that we've seen in flashes is Jalen Hyatt. And basically I like targeting guys on these dumpster fire teams, right? Because nobody wants to watch those games. So nobody necessarily sees some flashes of talent or potential. And you have to remember that this is a lost rookie year for Jalen Hyatt, right? We hope Daniel Jones is back. And of course, he's not a world beater by any means, but I think he at least has the arm to get the ball downfield to Jalen Hyatt. And we saw him execute Brian Daboll's scheme with a fair amount of success last year. I mean, they got lucky and got to the playoffs, but even so, you saw where Daniel Jones could succeed in that offense. So really like targeting those guys who the hype hasn't necessarily built just yet, where potentially it could in the coming offseason.
I like that a lot. I mean, we've hit so many guys this past year. I mean, we were telling everybody to buy Kyler Murray where he was going in like the 3rd round. And, we were very big on, drafting CJ Stroud where he was, drafting Sam Laporta where he was, trading for Trey McBride. I mean, so many guys that are, Travis Etienne's ascension, some of these guys. Snoog, who's another guy that you're like, you know what? I'm low key. I'm buying him right now. Like, I love the Spears take from both of you guys. That's definitely one of them. Who's another guy that you're like, all right, the offseason's about to start. I'm gonna get my guy now.
Yeah, this is a guy that I've been falling more and more in love with, just ignoring the QB factor, just because I love the talent. I love the talent coming out as a prospect. It's Drake London. And my fantasy Twitter has been blowing up about
Yes,
a lot
sir.
of Drake London content lately. You would think I'm turning into a Drake London fan page, but I just think his talent is so good that once he lands that quarterback, and I'm confident that they're gonna within the next 2 years, he will ascend as a top 10 dynasty wide receiver because he's so talented. The way he moves, his fluidity. He's 6'4" and he moves like he's a slot receiver. So he's not the fastest guy, but he's super quick, great release off the line, unbelievable hands. His catch radius is like Mike Evans. So he's a guy that I think will ascend like crazy. And people are sick of it. Like people are sick of him putting up 4 points a game, 5 points, 6 points, 20. Oh, there's 2 again with Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke. So I think there's an opportunity where you could start like tearing off like the Jalen Waddles and like the Chris Olaves and getting like maybe a late first on top for London. So that could be a move that makes you look like a genius come this time next year, especially with Justin Fields. If Justin Fields goes there,
Oh, please make it happen.
over. It's over for him.
John, we've had a lot of like parody episodes, a lot of fun doing like Jay-Z stuff, doing some rap, doing some things there. I one of my favorite moments I got to bring up before you talk about it is you at your pool walking down there for the draft board, man. You got to, we never got together for when we had all the draft picks doing that. Hey, look at us. But now's your time here. That was so much fun. But I want to know who right now is that guy that you're like, you know what? Let's start kicking the tires. I want to buy this guy.
Yeah, I love that moment, and we have worked in quite a bit of Jay-Z over the years. And by the way, like I do think I'd love to hang out with all you guys. It was great hanging out with Mung there in Chicago, going to a Bears game. I think I also ran into David Montgomery that particular day. That's one of my highlights, just having a chance to hang out with Mung there and tailgating. Good times there. We'll have to make that happen. I also want to say, Snoop, you kind of stole mine. Like I was like, invest in Atlanta, please. Drake London, 100% agree with everything you said there. Like I think that is a huge buy low. Like there's just no way you can roll out Ritter or any of the other options that they have there. I mean, are you going to go back to Heineke again? No, it's not going to work. I think Drake London is a huge buy, and you might even be able to buy Bijan a little bit low after what just happened. And Arthur Smith, I mean, he just lost to Carolina. The guy's got to get out of there. I think we need a new head coach, OC, QB situation. Justin Fields would be incredible. And I think that those guys are all buys. Let me throw a few others in there, though. And
don't steal my guys now.
I'll try not to, but Snoog and I, we kind of connected on Kendre Miller, right?
Yes.
Everybody knows I'm a huge Tajay Spears guy, and I've been kind of hyping him. Waldman also was hyping him. But Kendre Miller's like right there with Spears as an incredible buy right now. Because it's a lost rookie year. You hate to see the injuries, but so many of these running backs have bounced back and then really performed so well. I think you can buy Kendre Miller pretty cheap right now. So I like that one. I'm also going to throw out Rashee Rice. I love what I'm seeing with this kid. Did I steal yours, Dad?
You did, man. You did.
I mean,
I got one more.
We are. I'm just going to say, like, this is actually one of the things that this pod does very well. This might be what we do best, is predicting these breakout players. If you listen to it over the years, you got rosters full of guys you've been throwing out there. But, I mean, you just start looking at the numbers on Rashee Rice. I mean, he's basically putting up kind of target share and fantasy points per game like all the rest of the KC wide receivers combined. I still hear people talking about like who's going to be the guy there. I'm like, it's Rice. Trust me, it is definitely Rice. They look for him in the red zone. They basically manufacture him touches now. I really hate to say this because everyone knows how much I love Travis Kelce, but we're going to see just father time kind of creep up on this guy.
I moved him out of tier 1, baby. I'm sorry.
I get it. It's tough. Like we see this happen. It's kind of like as you break it down every week, right? You can kind of watch the game and see it happening in front of you. So Rashee Rice is a guy that's on the rise for me. We'll have to see what the KC does in the draft, but you can tell that Patrick Mahomes is looking for him now. And I think that for whatever reason, Dad, he just hasn't gotten the hype as a lot of the other guys in this wide receiver class.
Wide receiver 12 since week 6.
Come on.
He's wide receiver 24 in the year.
Even I'm super comfortable with him here in week 16, putting him in my lineup. I have no issue putting him in there. I like him this week.
Since you stole mine, I'll tell a little story in Smash Accept 2. Aaron Jones decided that he wasn't going to play on Monday night, and I was losing by 1.6. So I was like, all right. I talked to my boy, Commissioner Breeze, and I was like, let's make a trade. I got Jaden Reed at the time for Matthew Stafford, and I got a little bit thrown back my way. And I was like, and he got what? He didn't score enough to win the game for me. But since that time, from week 6 on, Jaden Reed has been the wide receiver
Baller.
18. And he's done it in a multitude of different ways, and he's only continued to improve. And he just isn't valued the way he should be. He's been playing fantastic. So love that. I want to move on to our next category that we want to talk about is just some of your favorite takes, some of your best takes, some of those ones that really, I know, John, my favorite show that we do right before the season starts, and Snoog, I'm excited for you to join in this year, is our hot take show. Is we just really drop it out there, where this was when, 3 years in a row, I predicted who the RB1 overall was going to be. And it was like, we hit on Jalen, we hit on a lot of guys. You absolutely nailed it on a guy that everybody was off on there for a while.
Yeah, I'm pretty proud of some of the takes that I've thrown out over the years. And I think you're referring to when I threw out Joe Mixon. And this was really not popular at the time. And I did put a hot take out, and we love putting those hot takes out, but they're, purposefully not likely to happen. But I put him out as a top 5 guy, and sure enough, he did hit that. And even this year, Mixon has still continued to exceed expectations, and I loved having him on my contending rosters as like an RB2. I'm plugging him in some of my playoff team rosters this week as well. It kind of reminds me too, we did a fun hot takes episode there with Dave Richard from CBS, who's really one of he's one of the big timers in the industry. Yeah. So you're just like we have Dave Richard on the
fanboyed that pod. I know.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
That was a while there where I was literally just DMing everybody. And then I was just remember a group chat with the 3 of us. I'm like, yo, I got this guy. And I know I still let Mung down on a couple of, his bucket list guys that we didn't get on here. But Mung, what are some of the takes that you've enjoyed over the years, other than, I know you like to throw out, after we had 3 weeks there where I had my Fulgham Forever. When I did the dad edits in the beginning, my graphics have gotten considerably better, but those early ones were gross. And I had one where I took the Batman Forever poster and put Travis Fulgham on there.
Yeah, but you've had good takes too. Don't sell yourself short, right? You convinced me on Jalen Hurts, who I'm still not convinced is a franchise quarterback for an NFL team, but for fantasy teams, I think he definitely is going to be a stalwart for years to come. I mean, he's not going to get all these easy tush pushes without an elite offensive line, but the guy can run, and he's a good enough passer where I do think he's a solid starter in the league for years and years to come. So good call by you. And, I'm just happy that a lot of my Dolphins takes worked out this preseason. The Ravens and the Dolphins were 2 of the teams that I was highest on.
You called those.
And everybody was
worried about Tua, right?
With Trey Lance.
With Trey Lance, in Miami.
Kid, I'm just picturing these 2 on vacation now, because Lance, he's sitting there at the bar, kind of just drowning his sorrows, and Mung's sitting right next to him, like with his arm around his shoulder, and he's having his drink because it takes, right? It's what I'm picturing.
Yeah, Dak joins in sometimes too.
Love it.
Oh, real quick though, I did want to touch on this is going to sound like a negative for Anthony Richardson, but I promise you I'm going to spin it as a positive. I think Anthony Richardson reminds me of Trey Lance in terms of a dynasty prospect, in that he's an elite physical talent that lands with a coach and surrounding weapons that can maximize his ceiling. It didn't work out with Trey Lance. Obviously, that was a miss. But again, the whole point was seeing what Brock Purdy is doing now in this Shanahan offense with Debo and Kittle and Ayuk. Yeah. That was the ceiling that we envisioned.
That could have been.
Right?
Shanahan
so when you look at what Shane Steichen's done with Gardner Minshew, and then you add in the rushing that a lot of people have forgotten. Anthony Richardson was not very good as a passer in his limited starts before he got hurt, but he was already providing top 5 fantasy quarterback value with the rushing. So if he can develop as a passer, again, that's the bet. That's the kind of bet that we want to continue to make in Dynasty.
And Snoog, I mean, when you first got on here, you were hyping, Travis Etienne, you were hyping Kamara. What are some of your favorite takes over the last year?
I'd say the best one, especially with value adjusted in Dynasty, is just the Kamara take. I mean, there was times I know a lot of people in the community were just saying, like, do I take Alvin Kamara for a 24-second? Do I take?
I got him everywhere for that. It was beautiful.
So I that was kind of one of the things I was just pounding the drum on, not just because he's my favorite player ever, but just because when you see a player of that talent surrounded by players like a James Conner and Aaron Jones, just guys that aren't on the same level, you have to take advantage of that. And that's just kind of what I saw. And I think Alvin Kamara is still one of the best running backs in the NFL, right there behind CMC. And if he was on a better team, like on a 49ers or on a Ravens, like he would probably be a top 5 dynasty running back to this day. So unfortunately, situation and suspension allowed for us to get that cost and just be able to ball out with him. I mean, he's my most owned dynasty player and it paid off well. So I have to say that's probably my biggest proud take this offseason. And DJ Moore was a good one that pretty much everybody was on, but I think we all manifested that, like Jalen Hurts, AJ Brown, Josh Allen, Diggs, DJ Moore, Justin Fields taken. I know Mung was big on DJ Moore as well. So
we were going to do some hot takes for the week, but I mean, this is just kind of karma here. But if you look at what Kyren Williams has done in 10 games, 18 carries, 3 receptions per game, over 1,000 total yards, 11 touchdowns, and I play him in 9 of my 10 semis this week. So he's going to go off. This has not been my fantasy year. Kyren Williams, get him wherever you can. But I got to read a couple of quotes here. It's like some of you guys from the Patreon, and this has been such a rewarding experience this year. When it first started, we launched the Patreon, and I was answering 300 or 400 questions a week, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what do we do? I'm going to lose my job. I'm like sneaking in the bathroom to get a quick text in, try to do these things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, my kid's like, Dad, get off your phone. Like they think I'm texting chicks and I'm talking to you guys, and I absolutely love it. And it's comments like that last week where the guy didn't have to get a nipple piercing because of my advice, that was
Love
fun.
That.
Corey P33 wrote, he started listening to Smash in January and got him hyped and made him jump into 2 dynasty leagues from 2 to 6. Thought 2 was going to be his max, but now he's ready for even more. He said, thanks for making it so enjoyable. Always offering ideas on how to maximize value for now and for the future, keeps things interesting. And that's what we've really tried to do is like, there's so many podcasts out there that just talk about values. And there's so many of them that talk about trades. And there's so many that talk about X and Y. And we try to take it from different angles. Like one of my favorite things is, I think a lot of times, John, you and I are like, so similar as individuals and their takes. And then Mung brings it in from the other side and he's like, no, wait a second. This is where you're at, and it's like the blending of all of us, the blending of our personalities, the way we do things has just been really enjoyable over the years. And it's just, I think that resonates with a lot of our listeners. They're like, some of them are like, I like Mung's takes. Other ones I like John's, I like Snoog's, I like Dad's, and I think that just kind of brings it all together.
Yeah, it's really true to just kind of think about we're better as a whole. We're better as a team. We're learning from each other and we're learning from you all, the listeners, because you're giving us all this feedback and you're kind of challenging some of our takes and making us kind of work through it, make sure that we've taken the right approach, the right process for all this. So, I mean, from day one, we were talking about cowbells there to now. Yeah, we're all a lot better. We have a lot to offer, but we're still learning.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, it always will come back to the community and just hearing from each other, helping each other out. It's so gratifying when you're getting a DM or a message in the Patreon like, hey, you helped me win a ship. I really want to thank you all. You guys were really my go-to. Or, hey, I just built this rebuild. Check out my roster. Here's where I'm going. Check out how many picks I have. I listened to your pod. You helped me with the strategy. And I'm just like, wow, I wish I had that roster,
Yeah.
Like, I love you guys. And I really just want to give a lot of shout outs to the Patreon and the community there with the Smash Accept and just all the listeners. It means so much to us. 200 episodes. That's very humbling. And we're just going to keep it going, going to keep listening to you all and what you want to hear. I'm really excited about the upcoming off season and breaking down these 2024 rookies, getting in some of these analysts that we talked about back on the show, and just helping you out in any way we can.
Yeah, and I'm really, like we talk about the most downloaded episode we have is the rebuild process, and that's something where I'm very proud of what we've put together with there, how to go step by step. And when people send me their pictures, and so many people have reached out on Twitter and in the Patreon, be like, Dad, I'm trying to get 12 because I know you had it last year, and then you got 10 and 11, and they think of the Thanos gifts and all those things that we did, and talk about how we transition, and those how-tos for me are the ones that I really enjoy doing, and I think over the years it's just been fun to see that grow. Mung, any parting shots here? I'm just, it's been such a fun ride. I mean, Snoog, I got to give you a shout out for making the Discord really good. I created it like in a boomer fashion. Last year it was just like, hey, everybody's
new
talking
school,
once.
new blood.
Nobody knows where anything is. Now it's so organized. You go to the right room. This is where everything is. And, a shout out to you. I want to hear both of your guys' parting shots. We'll start with Mung, then we'll go over to Snoop.
Yeah, I can't wait to do the episode 300 reunion in, I don't know, a year, 2 years, maybe 6 months at the rate that we're expanding these episodes.
300, let's do it.
But it's been fun, and at the end of the day, I know there's money involved and there's competition, but Dynasty and fantasy is fun, right? It starts as a hobby, and it's about growing those connections to the people you meet along the way. So I'm thankful for all you guys. I know Thanksgiving is past, and I'm thankful for all the listeners letting us ramble on and still listening for 4,000 minutes or whatever it is. And so, of course, I'll leave you guys with one final sleeper. Offensive and defensive line injuries matter a lot in the NFL, right? The O linemen and the D linemen don't get enough love as jersey sales or MVP votes, but it matters. And one guy who matters a lot is DJ Reader for the Cincinnati Bengals. He's like their Vita Vea, who is the guy who plugs up the run up the middle. And unfortunately, he got hurt last week. I know that Najee Harris has not been good the last couple of weeks, but I do think this is a bounce back spot for him. If you need running back help, if you need a flex guy to slot in this week, I don't hate Najee Harris. I think he could go for close to 60, 70 yards and hopefully punch in a touchdown.
Love it. Snoog, bring us home here. Talk to a little bit about, some of the experience that you've had here.
Yeah, I mean, it's been great growing the community, that new Discord as well. Everyone that's in the Patreon listening, please fill out that form I created. That's for us to kind of get a feel of how your experience has been, things that you would like us to change. We just want to make your experience as good as possible. So we're going to adjust things, try to make things more clear for you guys to see, get rid of some channels we don't need, make channels we do need, and just adjust because like you guys want better, we want better as well. So shout out to everybody listening that is in the Patreon, but also Snoog is back once week 17 ends. We're going back to the rookie threads. We're going back to the dynasty polls. We're going back to that old authentic Snoog. Woo! So I'm excited for it. I'm going to do a ton of rookie analysis for everybody, ton of dynasty stuff, values, who you need to buy low on, guys like Drake London, T. Higgins, DK Metcalf, and more. And so is every other guy in here. So we're going to be just crunching out dynasty content for all of you guys. And I want to do a lot more collaborations with these guys. I want to do more collaborations for rankings because I know that's what everybody cares about. Values, buy lows, more pods, more exclusive pods, getting more guests on the pod. So it's going up in 2024. So I'm excited to keep growing with you guys.
For the 200th time, thanks again for tuning in, guys, and enjoy the process. Let's go.